The filing came in at 3:47 station time, and I almost missed it. That is not an excuse. An attaché at the Compact Aid Secretariat does not get to miss filings, not even the ones that arrive in the dead hours of the third watch when the corridor lights have dimmed to overnight amber, and the only other person in the duty bay is Clerk Wessler, asleep in his chair with his chin on his chest and a cold cup of something synthetic balanced on the armrest. I was not asleep. I was reviewing a backlog of port clearance forms from the Ruthian corridor, which is the kind of work that makes a person wish they were asleep, and the filing slid into my queue flagged standard, non-urgent, which is how it almost became somebody else's problem in the morning. I caught it because the species tag was wrong. Every filing that comes through the Secretariat carries a species identifier in the header, a 3-letter compact code, 2 digits, sometimes a status suffix. The code for the Vailsoreth is VSR. I had been at the Secretariat for 4 years and I had never seen VSR on a filing. Not once. The Vailsoreth did not file with the compact. They did not ask for things. They were a closed theocratic civilization with a 700-year tradition of self-sufficiency, a fleet of their own, a medical corps of their own, and a theology that treated asking outsiders for assistance as something between an embarrassment and a minor heresy. Their High Cantor had addressed the Compact Assembly exactly twice in recorded history, once to observe a treaty boundary, once to object to a survey drone that had crossed into their outer drift. Both times the address had been brief, formal, and concluded without any request. I knew this not because I had made a study of the Vailsoreth, but because in 4 years at the Secretariat you absorb a great deal of species-specific protocol information simply by proximity, the way you absorb the layout of a building you spend most of your days in, not by memorizing the floor plan, but by walking the corridors until the turns are in your feet. The VSR code stood out the way a wrong turn stands out, something that registers before you have consciously processed why. VSR, non-urgent. I opened it. The filing was 3 paragraphs. That was the first thing that struck me, 3 paragraphs, where a standard emergency aid request runs 12 to 15, with attachments, with medical assessments, with logistics needs broken out by category and priority. 3 paragraphs, written in formal compact standard, the syntax precise and slightly archaic, the kind of language a species uses when it has learned a tongue from documents rather than from speech. There was a cleanness to it, a deliberate restraint, words chosen as if each one had been weighed against the cost of using it. The first paragraph identified the petitioning party, the High Cantor of the Vailsoreth Third Sanctuary, filing on behalf of the ordained fleet. The second paragraph described the situation. The right of passage vessel Voreth Kellen, which translates, roughly, as the crossing ship, had suffered a cascading coolant failure in the secondary propulsion ring while conducting a passage through the Seine Drift, approximately 4.2 light hours from the nearest Vailsoreth relay station. The Voreth Kellen was carrying 340 religious initiates, the year's cohort of young novices making the traditional passage voyage that marked the end of their first period of study and the beginning of their second. The vessel was not in immediate danger of catastrophic failure, but the coolant loss had disabled 2 of 3 drive systems and compromised the hull temperature regulation in the aft compartments. The initiates in those compartments had been relocated forward. The ship's own engineering corps was managing the situation, but the damage exceeded their on-board repair capacity. Estimated time to drift out of relay contact, 61 hours. The third paragraph contained the request: 1 repair tender with coolant system engineering capability, if available at the Secretariat's convenience. That was it, if available, at the Secretariat's convenience. 340 children on a damaged ship in deep drift, and the High Cantor had written if available at the Secretariat's convenience. I read it twice. Then I read the second paragraph again more slowly because there was something in the phrasing that I had moved past too quickly. The initiates in those compartments had been relocated forward. In the architecture of Compact Standard, that was a past tense clause embedded in a present tense status report, which meant it had already happened before the filing was sent. The aft compartments were compromised. The initiates had been moved. The filing did not say when. The filing did not say in what condition the initiates were when they were moved, or how long they had been in the aft compartments before someone decided it was time to move them. The filing used the word relocated, which is a very neutral word. I noted the neutral word and I moved on, because there was a queue decision to make. I checked the filing timestamp against the Compact Standard Response Matrix. Under current queue protocols, a non-urgent filing from a non-member species with no outstanding aid relationship would enter the standard review cycle. Estimated first response, 14 to 17 days. Estimated tender deployment, assuming approval at the first review cycle, 22 to 25 days. The Voreth Kellen had 61 hours before it drifted out of relay contact. After that, the filing would have no way to be updated, amended, or escalated. It would sit in the queue non-urgent while the ship drifted deeper into the Seine, and the next communication we received might be from a Vale Soreth relay station, 3 weeks later, reporting the outcome. I pulled up the queue to reclassify it as priority. The reclassification form required a supervisor's signature. My supervisor, Duty Officer Annan Pratcha, was on medical leave with 2 weeks remaining. His backup, Senior Attaché Velen, was at a liaison conference on Keseth Station and unreachable for another 6 hours. The emergency escalation pathway required 2 signatures from the same duty tier, and Wessler was still asleep in his chair with his chin on his chest and the cold cup wobbling on the armrest. I got up, walked to Wessler's chair, and put my hand on his shoulder. He startled awake, grabbed the cup before it fell, and looked at me with the expression of a man who has been doing overnight duty shifts for long enough that being woken at 3:50 registers as something that sometimes happens rather than something alarming. How, what is it? I need your signature, I said. Emergency reclassification, VSR filing. He blinked, VSR Vale Soreth. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, which told me that he, too, had never seen VSR on a filing. Then he took the reclassification form from my screen and he signed it. No questions. 4 years of overnight shifts together had built a shorthand between us, and the shorthand said, if Howe is waking me up at 3:50, it is because she has already checked whether it was necessary. I signed. I submitted the reclassification. Then, because the Compact's response matrix even for a priority filing was 12 to 15 days minimum for a non-member non-emergency, I did the other thing. I forwarded the filing, original, unedited, with my own summary note attached, directly to the Earth Aid Command duty channel. Earth was not supposed to receive direct forwarding from my tier. There was a process. There was always a process. The filing should have gone to the Secretariat's operations floor, which would have gone to the sector coordinator, which would have gone to the interagency liaison desk, which would, eventually in the fullness of the queue, have gone to Earth Aid Command. That was the process. I was a third-tier attaché with 4 years of service and a backlog of Rithian port clearance forms and no authority to jump the chain. My summary note said 3 things. There were 340 young people on a damaged ship in deep drift. The ship's relay contact window was 61 hours. The Vale Soreth had never filed with the Compact before. I forwarded it anyway. I noted in my own log that I had done so and why, and I attached the 61-hour countdown. Then I went back to the port clearance forms. Wessler went back to sleep. The duty bay returned to its amber quiet, and the only sounds were the ventilation system and the soft routine chime of the queue processing, and the occasional distant sound of someone in the outer corridor moving between sections. I sat with the port clearance forms, and I did not think about the filing, because thinking about it would not change the queue speed and would only make the next 4 hours longer. That was at 4:12. At 6:31, my duty channel received an acknowledgement from Earth Aid Command, not from the liaison desk, not from the interagency coordinator, from the command duty officer directly, a lieutenant commander whose name I did not recognize because I had never corresponded with anyone at that level before. The acknowledgement was 4 sentences. It confirmed receipt. It confirmed the 61-hour window. It noted that Earth Aid Command was assessing available assets. It concluded with a line I read 3 times before I was sure I had understood it. Assessment of available assets is complete. Deployment authorization is being processed. 2 hours and 19 minutes after I forwarded the filing. Deployment authorization being processed. I sat very still for a moment. The duty bay was still amber-lit and quiet. Wessler was awake now, processing his own cue, and he looked up when my posture changed. He was attentive to posture, Wessler, in the way of people who have spent a great deal of time reading rooms, and he said, "Good news or confusing news?" "Both," I said. I opened the Earth Aid Command Asset Registry, public access tier, which gave me names and last logged positions but not orders, and I looked at what was in the region. The registry showed 4 vessels within plausible range of the Seine Drift Corridor. A repair tender, the Halstead Asterisk, which was exactly what the Vale-Sareth had asked for, currently at the Seine Corridor Depot on standard rotation. A hospital frigate, the HDRS Maranthil Asterisk, currently docked at Tessalon Station for routine resupply. 2 engineering barges, the Gordon and the Sundre Asterisk, also in standard rotation at the Seine Corridor Depot. I thought they'll send the tender, maybe the tender and 1 barge, given the relay window pressure. That would be a strong response, more than the compact would send, more than the Vale-Sareth had requested. The barge alone had 4 times the coolant system engineering capacity of the Halstead Asterisk. Between the 2 of them, the job would be done in under 8 hours from docking. I noted this in my log. I noted it partly because I wanted to have it in writing that I had tried to anticipate correctly, and partly because it turned out to be so wrong that I have never quite stopped being embarrassed by it. At 7:14, the deployment order came through. I was CC'd because I had originated the forwarding. The order was formatted in Earth Aid Command Standard, which is not the same as Compact Standard and has a different visual rhythm, more direct, less categorical, the kind of document written by people who expect to act on it immediately rather than file it for review. The order listed in sequence: the Hospital Frigate Asterisk HDRS Maranthil Asterisk, Engineering Barges Gordon Asterisk and Sundre Asterisk, Repair Tender Asterisk Halstead Asterisk, Resupply Tender Asterisk Keth Marrow Asterisk, and at the bottom of the list, with a navigational notation that I will return to, the light frigate Halcyon Ridge Asterisk. 6 vessels. They were sending 6 vessels for a non-member species that had asked for 1 repair tender, if available, at the Secretariat's convenience. I counted the list again. The Asterisk Maranthil was a full hospital frigate, 3 surgical teams, an intensive care ward rated for 12 occupants at capacity, 2 trauma bays, a pharmaceutical complement covering 18 distinct species, a blood banking facility for 8 xenobiological types, a complete field hospital compressed into a ship's hull, crewed by 38 medical personnel and a support staff of 20 more. The Vale-Sareth had not requested medical support. The filing had not mentioned casualties. The filing had mentioned that the aft initiates had been relocated forward, which I had noted in my own mind as a precaution, not a crisis, which, I was now retroactively understanding, was exactly the impression the filing had been designed to create. The engineering barges Gordon Asterisk and Sundre were heavy industrial repair vessels, each carrying more coolant system engineering capacity than the entire Seine Corridor Depot maintained as standing reserve. Either one of them could have handled the Voreth Kellan Asterisk S coolant failure independently, in approximately 4 hours from docking. Both of them together could handle it in less than 2. The Halstead was the repair tender the Veilsoreth had asked for. It appeared on the list almost as an afterthought, the 4th vessel, after the hospital ship and 2 barges that together had already overfilled the request. The Keth Marrow was a resupply tender. I pulled her manifest from the public registry. She was carrying food stores, water reserves, medical consumables, spare parts across 14 equipment categories, and approximately 11 months of operational supplies for a vessel in the mid-weight class, which the Voreth Kellan was, or close to it. And the Halcyon Ridge Asterisk. The Asterisk Halcyon Ridge was a light frigate, crew of 68, 4 forward rail mounts, a missile suite rated for fleet engagement, and a point defense grid that could track 20 simultaneous inbounds. She was not a humanitarian vessel. She was not listed on any humanitarian deployment manifest in the Secretariat's registry. Her presence at the bottom of the order was annotated in the navigational field as follows: HDRS Halcyon Ridge conducting independent transit, Sen Corridor region. Transit path incidentally convergent with convoy route. No additional authorization required. A navigational coincidence. A warship, coincidentally in the same region, coincidentally traveling the same heading, coincidentally at the same speed as the convoy, for the full duration of a humanitarian operation in open drift. I looked at that notation for a long time. Then I made a note in my own log: do not ask, do not ask, do not ask. The deployment order also contained, at the very end, a brief administrative note directed to my attention. It read, Attaché M. Howe is requested to accompany convoy for compact Secretariat liaison purposes. Departure from Tessalon Station, 900. It was 7:32. I had 90 minutes. I filed a notification to Senior Attaché Velen, still unreachable, still at the conference, explaining where I was going and why. I packed a bag. Standard duty kit, diplomatic credentials, xenobiological reference pack for the Veilsoreth, 3 days of personal supplies. I noted in my personnel record that I was departing on emergency liaison assignment at the direction of Earth Aid Command. I did not call my supervisor, because my supervisor was on medical leave and I did not think it would help. Wessler handed me a nutrition bar from his desk drawer as I left the bay and said, "Come back with a good story," which is what he always says when someone in the duty bay deploys to something interesting. I was at Tessalon Station Dock 6 at 8:53, and the Marin Thiel was already there with her running lights on and her ramp down, her hull enormous in the dock cradle, the white and blue of the humanitarian corps clean against the station's industrial gray. A man in Earth Aid Command coveralls was standing at the base of the ramp with a manifest board, and he looked at me and said, "M. Howe, compact liaison." And I said yes, and he said, "Welcome aboard. We leave in 7 minutes," and that was the entire onboarding process. The convoy formed up at 9:17. I watched it from the Marin Thiel S observation lounge, which was on the port side and gave a clean view of the dock array. The 2 barges were already clear of their moorings, running lights bright in the early station hour glare, their bulk making them look slower than they actually were. The Halstead was behind them, smaller and more agile, her forward lock already sealed. The Keth Marrow was last, enormous and stately, her hull painted in the white and blue of the humanitarian corps with the Earth Aid sigil on her forward section, her cargo lock standing open because she was still receiving her last supply pallets, which were being loaded at a pace I would describe as urgent but controlled. The Halcyon Ridge was not at the dock. She picked up the convoy at the outer navigation buoy, appearing on the Marin Thiel S tracking display as a quiet green point that slid into formation at the convoy's flank without announcement. Her captain did not hail the convoy lead. She simply appeared, matched course, matched speed, and took a position off the starboard flank like a piece of furniture that had always been in the room. I watched her icon settle into position, and I thought about the notation in the deployment order. Incidentally convergent. No additional authorization required. The transit to the Seine drift took 39 hours. I spent most of it in the Marin S briefing room, going through the Voreth Kellen schematics that Earth Aid Command had pulled from the Compact's survey registry. Incomplete, 12 years old. Based on a passive sensor pass from a compact mapping vessel that the Vale Soreth had not been informed of, which was a diplomatic issue I decided not to think about at that particular moment. The schematics showed a vessel of considerable age, an older class of Vale Soreth design built for long open drift passages, larger than I had expected from a rite of passage ship. Not a warship, not a transport in the utilitarian sense. Something between a cathedral and a vessel, designed around the voyage itself as an experience rather than as transit from one point to another. Dr. Lane, the Marin S chief medical officer, sat across from me with the same schematics on her own screen. She was a compact woman with close-cut gray hair and the economy of motion that I have noticed in surgeons. Nothing wasted, nothing performative, every gesture arriving at its destination without the excess energy that most people expend on movement. She had been with the Humanitarian Corps for 22 years, and she read schematics the way I read Q filings, without obvious effort, absorbing the structure of the thing before attending to its details. Dusky purple skin tone, she said, half to herself, reading from a xenobiology file she had pulled alongside the schematics. Vale Soreth theocratic, closed society, minimized external contact, bilateral symmetry, 4 limbs, internal temperature regulation in the range of, she paused, recalculating from the Vale Soreth temperature scale to the standard. Their aft compartments. If the hull temperature regulation failed and they were in those compartments before relocation. The filing said they were relocated forward, I said. The filing said so. She looked at me over the top of her screen. Her expression was not unkind, but it was precise. The filing was 3 paragraphs, written by someone who described a heat regulation failure in occupied compartments as a reason for relocation, not as a medical event. I had read the filing. I had read it several times. I had noted the neutral word relocated and moved on, and now I understood that Dr. Lane, reading the same sentence, had heard what was underneath it. How bad? I asked. Depends how long they were in the compartments before they were moved. Depends on the temperature differential between the failing aft section and their thermal tolerance range. Depends on whether anyone was already compromised going in, sick, dehydrated, physically small. She set down her screen. I'm not going to speculate on numbers. We'll know when we get there. What are you preparing for? I asked, not as a challenge, as a genuine question. She looked at me steadily. Everything I brought, she said, which is why I brought everything. She went back to her preparations. I went back to the schematics. I made a note in my log that said, Dr. Lane's read on the relocation sentence. The filing was written to not alarm. Consider whether the high cantor knew this and chose it deliberately. I did not sleep much during the transit. At hour 21, we made relay contact with the Voreth Kellen asterisk. The contact window was 12 minutes. The relay geometry was shifting, and the Voreth Kellen was deep enough in the Seine corridor that the signal required 2 intermediate hops. The Marin S communications officer, a young man named Des Perrin who handled the handshake protocols with a quiet competence that I found deeply reassuring, managed to get through to the Voreth Kellen S bridge and pass a convoy notification. He did not give the full manifest. This was a judgment call on his part, and I thought it was the right one. He said, Convoy inbound, 6 vessels, ETA 18 hours, please have a docking clearance request ready. 6 vessels, 18 hours. There was a pause on the channel. I was standing at the communication station, close enough to hear the line directly rather than through the overhead speaker, and the pause was long enough that I began to wonder whether we had lost the signal. 8 seconds, 12, 17. Then a voice came through, low, resonant, with the slightly formal cadence of someone speaking compact standard as a learned language, choosing words with visible care. This is High Cantor Sevaloreth of the Third Sanctuary aboard the Voreth Kellen Asterisk. Please confirm. 6 vessels. Perrin confirmed it, reading from the manifest. Hospital frigate, 2 engineering barges, repair tender, resupply tender, and a 6th vessel on convoy formation. A second pause. We requested 1 tender, the High Cantor said. His voice was very careful, very even. The kind of even that is achieved by intention rather than by absence of feeling. Yes, sir, Perrin said. Earth Aid Command is sending the full complement. A third pause, longer than the second. The relay window was at 9 minutes remaining, and I watched it count down on the display. Then the relay geometry shifted and the channel closed, and I never knew what the High Cantor said in the seconds after that, because the window was gone. What I know is what Perrin told me afterward. In the 6 seconds before the channel closed, there was a sound on the line that he could not identify as any form of standard communication. Not a technical artifact. He had been a communications officer for 11 years and knew the difference between signal noise and sound with source. He could not describe what it was. He said it sounded like something that had been held very tightly, for a very long time, beginning to let go. I wrote that down in my log too. We came out of the Sen Drift corridor at hour 38, and the Voreth Kellen was there, gray against the dark, larger than I had expected and darker than the schematics had suggested. Her hull was older than the survey's estimate, I thought, the metal oxidized in the way of ships that have done many long passages without the kind of maintenance that requires external yard facilities. She was still in the water of space, that particular stillness that a ship achieves when it has stopped fighting its situation and is simply enduring it. One of her main drive housings was venting slowly, a thin crystalline plume catching the distant light of the Sen Amber Star. The aft section was dark except for running lights, and I could see, from the Marin Thiel S viewport, that 4 of the external port windows in the forward section were lit more brightly than the rest, amber light, the kind of improvised warmth that people create when the ordinary systems have failed, and the bodies in the room are the available heat source. 340 young initiates in those rooms for the last 39 hours. I held on to the viewport frame, and I looked at those 4 windows. The convoy went in methodically. The 2 engineering barges took flanking positions on the Voreth Kellen S propulsion section before we had even finished our own deceleration burn. I watched from the viewport as their external lighting arrays came on, bright white work light flooding the damaged hull section, and the first 2 engineers were in work suits and out the airlock before the docking clamps had finished setting. They moved with the unhurried efficiency of people who have performed this kind of work many times, not rushing, not dramatic, just moving from one point to the next with the economy of those who understand that wasted motion is wasted time. The Halstead moved to the secondary docking port, the one the Vale Sareth had opened in anticipation of the 1 tender they had requested. The Keth Marrow took station off the forward bow. The Halcyon Ridge took a position 800 meters off the Voreth Kellen S-port beam, running lights on, weapons cold, facing outward toward the deep drift. She did not hail the Voreth Kellen asterisk. She did not request communication. She did not announce herself to anyone. She simply faced outward and held station, and the message of her presence required no communication channel at all. I took the diplomatic shuttle to the Voreth Kellen S main lock with Perrin, and a junior aide named Corrigan who was making his first deployment and was handling it with admirable composure, doing his work and not making his feelings visible. The lock cycled, the pressure equalized, and the inner door opened, and I stepped through. I stopped. The Vale Soreth are taller than humans by a third. I had read this. I had encountered the fact in a xenobiological summary and processed it as a data point and moved on. I had not fully understood what it meant until I was in the corridor of the Voreth Kellen, and the officer waiting at the lock was looking down at me from a height that made me feel, briefly and irrationally, like a child standing at the foot of an adult staircase. He was in the uniform of the ordained fleet, dark fabric with the subtle sheen of a material I could not identify, gold thread at the collar. The cast marks on his forearms in a pattern that I would later learn indicated senior priesthood of the ship-going order. His skin was the color of deep bruise, a rich violet gray that shifted slightly in the amber light of the corridor, and his eyes were amber themselves, large and very still. He said in precise compact standard, "I am Subcantor Vethra, first officer of the spiritual complement. The High Cantor will receive the delegation in the forward sanctuary. Please follow me." I followed him. The forward compartments were warm. Too warm for a ship's standard operating temperature, not uncomfortably so for a human but perceptibly above the baseline. The Vale Soreth were running every available heat system, compensating for the failure in the aft sections with everything the functioning forward systems could provide. The heat had a quality to it that I associate with enclosed spaces where too many bodies have been present for too long, not unpleasant, but dense, the air carrying the faint signature of habitation compressed. The corridors were lined with initiates. That was the first thing I understood viscerally that I had not understood from the filing. The corridor from the lock to the sanctuary, I later measured it. It was 41 meters, was lined on both sides with young Vale Soreth, seated against the bulkheads with their knees drawn up and their backs against the wall. Younger than I had expected from the word initiates, which in my mind had carried an implication of near adulthood. Some of them were no more than adolescent by their species' developmental calendar, which I had looked up during the transit, and which roughly corresponds to human 17 or 18. They were wrapped in thermal layers, some in what appeared to be standard-issue ship blankets, some in heavier outer garments, and they watched me with those amber eyes, and I watched them back, and I counted, and I stopped counting when I reached the end of the first corridor because the number was already too large for me to hold in my mind without the back of my throat tightening. There were initiates who were not sitting. At the corridor junction, 20 meters from the lock, 2 Vale Soreth medics in lighter robes were moving between 4 stretchers laid end to end against the junction wall, checking readings from small devices pressed to the wrists of the figures on the stretchers. The figures on the stretchers were very still. One of them was small, smaller than the others in the corridor, wrapped in layers that seemed too large for the body under them. I did not stop walking. I made myself not stop. Stopping would have been a form of witness that I had not been invited to perform and was not yet equipped to perform, and the work that needed to be done was forward, not at the junction wall. But I saw it. I carry it. I will carry it as long as I carry anything. The forward sanctuary was a large compartment at the ship's bow, built around a broad viewport circular, perhaps 3 meters across, positioned so that whatever lay ahead of the ship was always framed in it. A prayer space, I understood, looking at the arrangement of the pews and the orientation of the room's objects. A space designed so that the act of looking forward and the act of offering devotion were the same gesture. Whatever was ahead of the Voreth Kellen at any given moment was present in this room as the ambient fact of the journey. What was ahead of the Voreth Kellen at this moment was the convoy. The High Cantor was standing at the viewport. I had read his title. I had read a brief entry in the Vale Soreth cultural files, 2 paragraphs, which was approximately how much the compact's cultural registry contained on any given Vale Soreth institution. Sevaloreth was older than the Subcantor, considerably older, I thought, by the way his posture carried the weight of accumulated years rather than physical decline. Tall, as all the Vale Soreth were, but taller still by some quality of bearing that had nothing to do with height. His cast marks covered both forearms and the back of both hands, and extended onto his neck above the collar of his robe, which I would later learn indicated something very senior indeed by Vale Sareth standards. The marks of an office held across decades, built up over the course of a life. His robes were simple, darker than his officer's formal attire had probably been, the robes of someone who had set aside the garment of ceremony for something older and more direct. He was watching the viewport. Through the viewport, I could see the convoy at work. The Gordon Asterisk and Sune Dre with their worklights blazing white against the Voreth Kellen S oxidized hull. The Marin Thiel with her hospital lock extended to the Voreth Kellen S secondary emergency port. The umbilical corridor rigged by the engineering crew in the first 20 minutes, already lit from inside. The Keth Marrow, patient and enormous, her forward cargo lock standing open. And at the edge of the viewport, just at the frame, the running lights of the Halcyon Ridge a steady point of light facing away from us into the drift. The high canter did not turn when I entered. Sub-canter Vethra had stopped at the doorway. Perrin and Corrigan were behind me. No one spoke. The room had the quality of a space where a great deal of silence had accumulated, not as emptiness but as substance, the silence of a place where someone has been thinking for a long time. After a moment that lasted, I think, about 40 seconds, though it is difficult to be precise about such things, the high canter said, in compact standard without turning, "How many?" I understood the question. I had received the preliminary assessment from Dr. Lane's team by comm in the 20 minutes between the Marin Thiel S docking and this meeting. Preliminary, she had said. We need more time with all of them, but preliminary was what I had. 329 confirmed viable, I said. 11 are the 11 in the aft compartments who were the last relocated. They were not viable when our medical team reached them. I am very sorry. The high canter was very still. Sub-canter Vethra said from the doorway, his voice flat in the way of a voice that has been made flat by sustained effort. They were in the aft compartments for 14 hours. The forward areas reached environmental capacity before we could complete the full relocation. The hull temperature failure in the aft section, we had estimated a slower degradation rate. The estimate was incorrect. He paused. 14 hours at sustained thermal deviation. Yes, I said. I did not have anything else to say to that, and I have learned in 4 years at the Secretariat that the words you should not say occupy a much larger space than the words you should. Silence, held with intention and without fidgeting, is a form of respect that translates across more species than most things I know. The high canter finally turned. He looked at me with those amber eyes, and he looked at me in the way of someone who is deciding what to make of what they see. Then he looked past me, in the slow, thorough way of someone taking in the shape of a room for the first time and recording it for later. 1 repair tender, he said. That is what we requested. Yes. And you sent, he paused. The Marin Thiel the Gordon the Sune Dre the Halstead the Keth Marrow and the Halcyon Ridge I said. 6 vessels. You sent a hospital ship. Yes. We did not request a hospital ship. No, I said, you didn't. He was quiet for a moment. Then, we would have lost more. Without the medical team, the initiates we recovered with significant heat exposure, those who required immediate intervention, we would have lost more. Possibly, I said, probably. He turned back to the viewport. He put one hand on the glass, spread flat, and he looked out at the Marin Thiel with her umbilical extended, and her lights on, and her 3 surgical teams already inside the Voreth Kellen S secondary compartment, working. We are a closed people, he said. We do not petition. It is not our practice, and it is not comfortable within our theology. The act of asking those outside the sanctuary for material assistance, it required a caste council discussion before the filing was sent. He paused. 3 days. I did not say anything. 3 days, he said again, while the initiates in the aft compartments waited for a theological resolution. He said it without accusation, not toward me, not toward himself, not toward the caste council. He said it with the tone of a person recounting a fact that they have looked at clearly and are going to continue looking at clearly. There were those who said we should not file at all, that the situation was manageable with our own resources. If we adjusted our estimates of what was necessary and what was possible. High Cantor, I said carefully, your own resources were not rated for this situation. No, his hand was still on the glass. They were not. We knew this by the end of the first day, and we spent 2 more days determining whether it was theologically permissible to know it. I thought about the 11 bodies in the corridor junction. I thought about what 14 hours in a failing thermal environment meant for a young body, any young body, and I held the thought and then I set it aside, because this was not the moment for it, and the High Cantor was not asking me to share it. The filing asked for 1 tender, I said. We wrote it to be as small as possible, he said, as unimposing. We did not know what you would, we did not know whether you would respond. We had no basis for expectation. We thought if we asked for very little, the answer was more likely to be yes. He turned toward me slightly, and I saw that this admission had cost him something. It is not a small thing, I think, for a person who leads a closed people and represents an ancient theological tradition, to say, we asked for little because we were afraid of being refused. I understand, I said, I meant it. And you sent 6 vessels. Earth Aid Command sent 6 vessels, I said. I forwarded the filing. I had no authority over the response. You forwarded it. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. Through the viewport, I could see one of the Gordon *S engineers, recognizable by her suit markings as the lead engineer, a woman named Hess, whose name I had learned from the convoy manifest, moving along the Voreth Kellen *S hull with a cable bundle, her movements precise and economical. The worklights caught the texture of the damaged hull plating and threw it into relief, the long scoring from the coolant event visible even from the sanctuary viewport. The ship at the edge, the High Cantor said, the one that faces outward. The Halcyon Ridge a light frigate. A warship. Yes. We did not request a warship. No one did, I said, which was careful but accurate. Her captain filed a navigational convergence notation. It means she was traveling in the same region and maintained convoy formation as a navigational incidence. The High Cantor looked at me directly. You are a diplomat. An attaché, I said, 3rd tier. A diplomat, he said again, and his tone was not ironic. It was the tone of someone offering an accurate characterization. What does the warship actually mean? It means that nothing will approach this convoy without having to consider the Halcyon Ridge first, I said. That is my honest belief. I don't have documentation that says so. No, he said. He looked back at the running lights at the edge of the viewport frame. No, I believe that is correct. A pause. Does her captain know we are a closed people who do not engage in external military relations? That her presence here has no treaty basis and no prior arrangement? I expect so, I said. And she came anyway. She is coincidentally in the region, I said. He made a sound that, if it had come from a human, I would have called a soft exhalation that means, I understand what you are doing and I accept it. The next 22 hours were the work. The engineering crews worked in organized rotation, and the sounds of that work were present throughout the Voreth Kellen in the way that meaningful activity is present, not loud but pervasive, a constant reminder that something important was being done. I moved through the ship in the intervals between my liaison duties, and I watched. The Gordon *S lead engineer, Hess, had set up a coordination station in the secondary engineering bay, alongside the Vale Sarath's own engineering officer, a young subcantor of the technical order named Selketh, who had the particular alertness of a person who has been awake for too long, and is running on the clarity that sometimes comes after exhaustion, when the body decides that sleep is no longer an option and gives the mind everything instead. He and Hess worked from the same schematics, pointing at the same displays, Selketh providing the ship-specific knowledge that no outside survey could have captured, and Hess providing the engineering solutions that went beyond what the Voreth Kellen *S own systems could implement. They did not share a common language beyond Compact Standard, and Compact Standard was not Selketh's primary tongue, but the work had its own language and they were both fluent in it. I watched them for 20 minutes and then I went back to my liaison duties, because I was not an engineer and I was not useful there except as an observer. Dr. Lane and her teams worked continuously. I say that with the precision I tried to apply to everything in this deployment. There were 3 teams and they rotated, but the rotation was compressed because the medical need did not respect shift schedules. The initiates who had been in the aft compartments presented with a range of thermal exposure outcomes, some mild, some serious, some critical. The ones who were critical arrived in Dr. Lane's triage in the first 2 hours after docking, when the Marin Thiel *S medical crew had made their way through the umbilical corridor and begun their assessments. The stretchers from the corridor junction came through the umbilical in the first 30 minutes. I saw Dr. Lane twice in those 22 hours. The first time, she was in the secondary triage compartment that had been converted from an equipment storage space by the Marin Thiel *S crew in the hour before I arrived, and she was speaking quietly to the Vale Sarath medical officer, a calm woman who wore the same light robes as the medics I had seen at the junction, whose name I later learned was Subcantor Vethola. They were standing together at a display showing biological readouts in a format I did not fully understand, and I saw Dr. Lane point at something on the screen and explain something, and Vethola listened and then asked a question, and Dr. Lane answered it, and Vethola nodded, the slow nod of someone absorbing new information and integrating it into what she already knows. It was a clinical consultation between 2 medical professionals who did not share a common species background and were finding the common ground in the work itself. I watched it for perhaps 30 seconds and then I went on. The second time I saw Dr. Lane was at hour 17, in the corridor outside the triage compartment. She was standing with her back to the bulkhead, drinking something from a container, her eyes calm in the way of a person who has made a decision about where the feelings will be kept until there is a proper time and place for them. "How are we doing?" I asked. 329, she said. "That number is holding." "Good," I said. "We lost one more than I wanted to," she said, not as a professional assessment, as something else. "There was one I thought we might," she stopped. "The heat exposure was too long. He was in the aft section from the first hours of the failure. The other 11 were also from the first hours." The initiates assigned to the aft compartments were the oldest in the cohort. They had been given the aft berths as a form of honor, because the aft section was traditionally considered the most significant on a passage voyage, the section closest to the drive, and therefore closest to the mechanism of the journey. She paused. The ones who died were the oldest. I thought about that. I thought about the honor of being assigned to the aft berths and what that honor had cost. "Read the Vale Sarath xenobiology entry on thermal tolerance," she said. "Then read the filing again. The filing says they were relocated when the temperature regulators failed. It doesn't say how long after the failure." She looked up. "The High Cantor wrote that filing very carefully, Howe. He wrote it so that we wouldn't know how bad it was when we got here." "He was afraid we wouldn't come," I said. "He was afraid you'd send one tender," she said. which is what he asked for, which is what the compact would have sent in 3 weeks. She finished her drink and folded the container with the economy she applied to everything. We sent a hospital ship. That number is 329 instead of something else. She went back through the triage door. At hour 20, the asterisk Kethmero began her supply transfer. The transfer took 4 hours, the kind of sustained, organized work that has its own rhythm, the pallets moving through the umbilical in a continuous stream, the Vale Soreth Ordnance and the Keth Marrow asterisk S crew working alongside each other in the staging bay with the practical cooperative attention of people who have a common physical task and do not need conversation for it. I spent an hour in the staging bay, not because my presence was required there. It was not, but because I wanted to see it. I watched a young Vale Soreth initiate, one of the older ones, perhaps 16 by their calendar and therefore of an age to be assigned to work duties during the transfer, carrying pallets alongside a asterisk Keth Marrow asterisk crew chief, a stocky woman from the resupply crew whose name, from her suit badge, was Petrakis. The initiate was taller than Petrakis by a full hand, violet gray and amber-eyed and careful in the way of someone navigating a working relationship with a stranger, stepping around the other person with precise courtesy. Petrakis said something to the initiate that I could not hear from my position. The initiate responded in Vale Soreth, which Petrakis did not speak. Petrakis nodded anyway, the broad practical nod of someone who receives a communication they do not understand in language and understands entirely in context, and they set the pallet down together on the staging grid. I made a note of that in my personal log. At hour 22, the engineering teams completed their work. The Voreth Kellen asterisk S3 drive systems came online in sequence, each one confirmed by Subcantor Selketh from the engineering station and relayed to the bridge and then to the convoy lead. And when the third confirmation came through the corridor speakers, the sound that went through the forward compartments was quiet, not a cheer, nothing so unrestrained, but something that had the quality of a collective breath being released after a very long time of being held. Subcantor Vethra ran the full system check personally on the bridge and transmitted his confirmation to the convoy lead, and I was in the asterisk Marin Thiel asterisk S communications bay with Perrin when the confirmation came through. "She'll make it home," Perrin said. "Yes," I said. I had been awake for most of the transit and all of the 22 hours of work. There was a particular quality to my exhaustion by then, not the dull fatigue of too little sleep, but the weighted exhaustion of a person who has carried something for an extended period and can feel, now that the weight has shifted, exactly how heavy it was. I sat in the communications bay without moving for a few minutes. Perrin did not disturb me. He understood. Then I went to find the High Cantor. He was in the forward sanctuary again. He had not, as far as I could determine from Subcantor Vethra's careful non-answers to my careful non-questions, slept. He was standing at the viewport, but the ship was different now. The lights were on across the full hull, the engineering bays lit, and the corridor lights at normal strength rather than the compensated amber of the previous hours. Through the viewport, the convoy was beginning to move into departure configuration. Not departing yet, the umbilicals were still retracting, the clamps releasing in sequence, but orienting, the slow, careful geometry of ships preparing to leave. "Your engineers are extraordinary," the High Cantor said without turning. He had heard my footsteps in the doorway and had, I realized, been expecting me. Our own could not have done this work in the time available. We would have lost more. "They're good at what they do," I said. The engineering chief, Hess. She and Selketh worked from the same display for 16 hours. They do not share a primary language. "The work has its own language," I said. "Yes," he was quiet for a moment. "I have been composing the memorial service for the 11. He paused. "In our tradition, the names are read by the presiding cantor. I will read them tonight when the ship has gone to rest light." He paused again. I would ask, this is not a thing we have done before, and I do not know the correct protocol. I would ask if you would read the names also. I thought about that. I'm not a religious official, I said. I'm a compact attaché, third tier. I know what you are, he said. I'm asking you because you were here, because you forwarded the filing, because you came. He paused. And because the 11 died in a failure that our own resources could not correct, that the help we asked for could not reach in time, and that the help we did not ask for, the hospital ship, the medical teams, narrowed to 11 rather than more. I want someone who was here for all of that to speak the names, even if she mispronounces them. I stood still for a moment. I will, I said. Thank you, he said, and then nothing more, which was the right amount. We stood at the viewport together for a while without speaking. Through the glass, the Halcyon Ridge was still in position off the port beam, her running lights steady, still facing outward toward the drift. As I watched, she began a slow positioning burn, not departing, just maintaining her station as the Voreth-Kellen*S drives settled into their active configuration and the ship adjusted its orientation. She never hailed. She never announced herself. She was there, and she continued to be there, until it was time not to be there anymore. The warship's captain, the High Cantor, said, "What is her name?" "Commander Tavi Essen," I said. "I would like to send a communication to Commander Essen." "I can arrange that." "I do not know what to say to her," he said. "In our traditions, the language for gratitude, for the kind of protection that does not ask to be asked for, that arrives without being summoned, that stands between you and whatever might come, it is the language of prayer. The vocabulary we use for our gods. I do not know whether a human commander would find that appropriate." I thought about Commander Essen on the bridge of the Halcyon Ridge running a navigational coincidence for 22 hours with her weapons cold and her running lights on and her face to the dark. "I think she would understand what you meant," I said, "whatever words you chose." The memorial service was held at rest light, the Vale Soreth shipboard approximation of dusk. The lighting shifted to a lower amber register that I recognized from the hours of the damaged ship, except that now the amber was a choice rather than a necessity. The sanctuary filled with initiates and officers and the medical staff from both ships, those who were not on active duty. 329 young people in the pews, crowded, because the sanctuary was designed for a smaller gathering, and 11 names to be read. The High Cantor read the names first in Vale Soreth. The language is tonal, and the names in tonal register had a quality I have no adequate language for, the sound shaped as if the language understood that names are among the most important things language does, and had built in the architecture to carry them. He read slowly. Each name was given space. The room was absolutely still between each name. The kind of stillness that 300 people achieve only when they choose it unanimously and continuously. Then he gestured to me. I stood at the front of the sanctuary. I had the paper in my hands, the paper on which the High Cantor had written the 11 names in Vale Soreth script, and below each name the compact standard transliteration, in his own careful handwriting, the tonal markers indicated by small notation marks above the vowels. 329 amber eyes. I read the names. I mispronounced 3 of them. I knew I was mispronouncing them. The tonal markers were guidance, not a guarantee, and human vocal anatomy approximates Vale Soreth tonal sounds rather than reproducing them. The High Cantor did not correct me. No one corrected me. In the silence after each name, 329 people breathed together, and the amber light held everything in the room in a common register. After the last name, I folded the paper and stood quietly. The High Cantor spoke in Vale Soreth, a short passage, words I was not given a translation for at that moment. Then he was still. After a moment he said, in compact standard, "We asked for 1 tender." No one answered him. I thought about the Marin Thiel S surgical teams, who had worked with a 12-year-old xenobiology file, and an 18-species pharmaceutical kit, and had stood 11 losses because 11 was the number and standing losses is what you do when you cannot prevent them. I thought about the engineer Hess and subcantor Selketh sharing a display for 16 hours across a language gap. I thought about Petrakis and the initiate and the pallet. I thought about Commander Essen out there in the dark facing the drift. I thought about the 3-day theological discussion and the high cantor who had sat through it knowing what was happening in the aft compartments, who had written a filing in language calibrated to be as unimposing as possible because he did not know if the galaxy would say yes, and who had asked for one tender because one tender was the smallest possible request, the one that was hardest to refuse. We asked for one tender. What I said quietly, to no one in particular and to everyone in the room, was, "I know." The convoy departed at 3:14 station time. The high cantor stood at the viewport and watched them go. I was beside him, because I had asked subcantor Vethra if I could be present for the departure, and he had said yes without hesitation, which I took as the right kind of answer. The Gordon went first, her work lights extinguished now, running dark except for the standard formation lights. Then the asterisk Sundre asterisk, then the Halstead asterisk, small and purposeful. Then the asterisk Keth Marrow, turning her enormous hull with a patience that seemed like a quality of the vessel rather than its engines. The Marin Theo last, her hospital lighting cycling down as she moved into convoy configuration, the umbilical collar retracted and sealed, her hull clean. The asterisk Halcyon Ridge did not join the convoy line. She waited until the convoy had cleared, then made her own burn, technically a different heading by 4 degrees, the minimum deviation to classify as an independent transit. She filed, I learned later, a closing navigational notation. HDRS Halcyon Ridge completing coincidental transit, Sen Corridor region. Independent heading resumed. A navigational coincidence, beginning and ending. I watched her running lights diminish. The lights were very steady, very calm, receding at the speed of a vessel whose captain knows where she is going and is in no particular hurry because the work is done. They diminished to points, and then to a single point, and then to the kind of nothing that is different from the surrounding nothing only if you know where to look. When they were gone, the high cantor put his hand on the viewport glass. He held it there for a long time. He looked out at the place where the convoy had been, at the darkness they had vacated with the same unhurried competence with which they had filled it, and he was very still. I filed my after-action report 17 hours later from the Voreth Kellen *S Communications Bay. The report covered the deployment scope, the asset manifest, the outcome metrics, and the liaison activities. 329 initiates recovered viable, 11 non-viable on arrival of medical teams. Full coolant restoration, all 3 drive systems returned to operational status. Supply transfer complete. All scope items executed. In the section marked Operational Notes, I described the asterisk Halcyon Ridge asterisk S presence as HDRS Halcyon Ridge maintained navigational coincidence for duration of humanitarian operations. Presence provided passive security deterrence in open drift. No hostile contacts. No incidents. Escort authorization documentation on file per Captain Essen's transit log. In the final section, Scope Disparity, I wrote, Earth Aid Command's response exceeded the requested scope by 5 vessels and 3 surgical teams. This overdeployment resulted in medical outcomes that would not have been possible within the requested scope, including the recovery of an estimated 47 additional initiates who presented with acute thermal exposure, requiring immediate intervention on medical team arrival. The overdeployment was consistent with Earth Aid Command's standing humanitarian response doctrine. No corrective measures are recommended. Senior Attaché Velen, when he returned from the liaison conference and read my report, called me on a closed channel and said, How? The scope disparity section. Yes, I said. No corrective measures are recommended. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. That's going to generate a discussion at the resource allocation review. I expect so, I said. Was the asterisk Halcyon Ridge actually a navigational coincidence? That is what Captain Essen's transit log documents, I said. A long pause. All right, Velen said finally. I'll handle the allocation review. 3 weeks after the convoy returned, a formal communication arrived for me from the third sanctuary of the Vale Sorath, addressed personally, sealed with the High Cantor's caste mark. The seal indicated, according to the cultural files I looked up, communications of official theological significance, the kind that are understood to carry the full weight of the office behind them. Inside was a single sheet, written by hand, the 11 names in Vale Sorath script with compact standard below each line, and below the names a line of text. The line read, "Their names were spoken by one who was not of our caste and not of our people, who had no obligation to speak them and no tradition that required it, who came when called and stayed until the names were given their weight. We record this so that the names are not only ours." Below that, in a different hand, the High Cantor's, one more line in Vale Sorath that had not been translated. I forwarded it to a Vale Sorath linguistic specialist at the Compact's Cultural Registry, who returned a translation the following day. The phrase was archaic formal religious register, used in historical texts for the act of answering a prayer that had been offered without expectation of answer. The translation was, "You came." 2 words. I kept the sheet, I have it still. 329 children, in a ship made warm again by people who sent far more than anyone asked for. 11 names, spoken in amber light by someone who mispronounced 3 of them. A warship facing outward in the dark, whose captain filed a navigational coincidence and asked nothing in return. We requested 1 tender. "You came,"